Welcome back to Generation Rogue, the podcast where we challenge the mainstream narratives. We like to define the mainstream over here, and we like to question a lot of stuff. I'm Kate Hildreth, and today's episode is about the military, a cornerstone of American strength, at least it should be, and a growing concern about how diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as DEI, is reshaping it. All of this is coming up on Generation Rogue. All right. So, for those of you who are not familiar, I'm sure most of you are, DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. On paper, it sounds harmless, perhaps even noble. After all, who wouldn't want fairness and opportunity for all? However, in practice, it often means hiring or promoting people based on identity markers such as race, gender, or sexual orientation rather than ability, which becomes a problem when you have a job that you really needed a lot of merit for. It's not just, your typical grocery store job. No offense to grocery store workers. I used to work at a grocery store. Also a very important job. But when we're talking about something like the military, there are quite literally lives at risk, depending on the type of people you hire, right? You want strong people in the military. And so this DEI has kind of spread across corporations, schools, and now, of course, even our military in the last several years. Um, and when it comes to our armed forces, the stakes, as I said, are very high. It's not about who gets a corner office or a participation trophy. These are life and death situations we're talking about here. It's about maintaining a fighting force that can protect our homeland and win wars. So, back when Donald Trump was in his first term, there was a transgender military ban, banning transgender individuals, people experiencing gender dysphoria and moving towards transition, banning those people from enlisting in the military. And in 2019, I believe, the Supreme Court lifted that ban under the Biden administration. Now, sort of recently, we've seen some headlines that Donald Trump would reinstate the ban that he originally put on transgender individuals serving in the military. Now that he's reelected, of course, there are questions about this. What's he going to do? I don't know. What happens come January? And it's a controversial topic, to say the least. So, on the one hand, I think military readiness, and I think a lot of people would agree with me, military readiness should be a top priority. Um, there are real concerns about sex specific spaces, physical standards, and mental health challenges that are unique to people experiencing gender dysphoria. For example, a combat zone is not exactly a good place to manage hormone therapy or recover from some kind of transgender surgery. We need our military to be the fastest, strongest, toughest force out there. So when we hear critics arguing that, excluding people experiencing gender dysphoria, that's discriminatory, and it wastes the talent of people who are willing to serve, we can't forget that the military has countless non-combat roles, okay? Where those concerns are a little bit less relevant. Now, the military is not a social experiment, first of all. The question has to always be, does this make the US a more lethal and effective force? If the answer is no, then the answer is no, period. And and don't even get me started on suicide rates of veterans. Okay, so you couple that with someone who already has a history of mental illness, someone who already is in a group that has high suicide rates. Couple those things together, this doesn't sound like a good recipe for anyone's well-being. Okay, so if we actually care about the well-being of people experiencing gender dysphoria, throwing them into a stressful, a very high stress military position, um, could very well exacerbate existing mental issues. It doesn't sound like a good idea to me. Now, what is a good idea is prepping the right way for the holidays. Attention parents, I have an early Christmas gift for you. We've all been there. 1 minute, your kiddo is bouncing off the walls, and an hour later, they are super sick. You feel helpless, and it can turn your plans upside down, especially on vacation or in the holidays, through the holidays. After thousands of customer requests, the wellness company has just launched the Kids Medical Emergency Kit. You no longer have to deal with emergency illnesses in panic mode. Now you can have 6 critical medications at your fingertips to treat 20 plus illnesses for issues like strep throat, ear infections, lice, respiratory illnesses, avoiding urgent care in hospitals. The Kids Emergency Kit has been hand selected by the wellness company's medical board and includes chewable amoxicillin, dissolvable ivermectin, and an optional EpiPen, and more. This includes a detailed guidebook guiding you step by step through emergencies. Ordering this kit is simple. Only parents can order for their children. Fill out an intake form and you'll get a verification call for consent. Then it's delivered to your door. Don't wait until you're in the middle of a crisis and avoid late night urgent care runs. Order your kid's medical emergency kit today and remove panic from your life. And if 1 or 2 of the scripts run out, there's a replenishment option to restock only what you need. Go to dailyclouthealth.com and grab your kid's emergency kit right now. Use code KATE to save up to $40 at checkout. These kits are only available in the USA. So, look, if people experiencing gender dysphoria want to serve in the military and they complete all of the physical and mental requirements, that's great. Okay, at least they aren't being brought on as some sort of DEI filler instead of being brought in on merit. But here's the other issue. If you have a man who thinks he's a woman, now you have this recurring issue of a man demanding access to women's bathrooms and other private spaces. Now it's no longer about plain old inclusivity. Now you're violating the rights and privacy of female soldiers. That's not okay. This is an article from ACLU that I want to read you part of. At the top, it says it was updated in January 2019 when the Supreme Court lifted blocks on the trans military ban that were secured by 2 lawsuits while federal courts continue to review. So I'm just going down a little bit here in the article. After 4 separate courts blocked the Trump administration's ban on transgender people serving in the military, the White House announced a new plan to carry out the ban on March 23rd. How is this possible and what does this mean? We sat down with 3 lawyers from our LGBT and HIV project, Josh Block, Chase Strangio, and James Essex, to break it down. Last week, the Trump administration announced a new plan to implement the ban on trans people serving in the military. What does this policy actually do? Josh Block says they are calling it a new policy, but it's really just following through on what Trump ordered last year. He told the military last year to ban transgender people from serving. Last week, the military did it. Chase Strangio says, quote, "Yes, it's just the military's implementation of his order to ban trans people from serving. There is nothing new. The implementation of Trump's plan, which was released last Friday, is a wholesale ban on trans people serving, just like Trump asked for when he first tweeted." The article goes on. Can some trans people stay in the military? Josh says yes. They made an exception to the policy for people who are already in the military and diagnosed with gender dysphoria to get around the court orders in place. But that is a small exception. The actual policy is that if you're a transgender, you can't serve. So trans people can't enlist unless they serve as the gender they were assigned at birth. Chase says correct. And only if they have taken no steps to transition of any kind. So really, trans people can enlist. Also, many trans people do have gender dysphoria, and if they have access to a doctor, a diagnosis. But for people currently serving, many were serving in the shadows before the previous ban was lifted in 2016. So they do not have that documentation. James says the implementation policy says that trans folks who don't want to transition, who don't suffer from any dysphoria because of being trans, and who can serve in as their assigned sex at birth can enlist or serve. But do those people even exist? Chase says, I don't think those people exist. Or if they do, they aren't trans. All right. So I think that article is important because, especially at the end, it clarifies that actually people experiencing gender dysphoria can serve in the military as long as they enlist as their biological sex, not as whatever gender they feel like they are. Um, they have to enlist as their biological sex, and they cannot have taken any steps to transition, i.e., they can't be, on hormone therapy. They can't have had transgender surgeries. Um, Now, if there was some world in which someone who happened to be experiencing gender dysphoria was completely physically and mentally capable of a high stress military role and did not demand access to private spaces consistent with gender identity instead of biology, that could be a good conversation to have. I don't think it would even be a conversation, honestly. Um, and like the article said, you can enlist as long as you are enlisting as your biological sex and you haven't had medical procedures such as hormone therapy or surgery to transition. Um, Unfortunately, I don't see that happening at all, especially since we can't even keep men out of women's sports and beauty pageants and locker rooms and bathrooms in the civilian world. It's already caused a whole lot of problems here. And I personally don't think that we need to add those problems to our military. Again, the military should not be a social experiment. The military should be discriminatory against those who do not make it stronger. Otherwise, the military is just a club that we've let people into, not based on merit or skill or ability, but on feelings. And we definitely don't need that. We need to be ready with the strongest force possible for when we are faced with real threats. Now, speaking of readiness, here's where it gets even more controversial, guys. Ugh, more controversial. Let's talk about women in combat roles. Okay. I know a lot of people disagree with me on this, but this is seriously something that I want everyone to think about. Um, unless women, in my opinion, unless women meet the exact same physical standards as men, they shouldn't be in combat roles. Sorry. If you can't do the same number of push-ups as a man, you shouldn't be in combat role in the military, okay? If you can't do the same number of pull-ups, if you can't run the same distance, if you can't run within the same time constrictions, you shouldn't be in a combat role. What do I mean by that? Combat isn't, at least it shouldn't be, a you tried your best situation. It's brutal and relentless, and it demands peak physical performance. If a male soldier has to carry a wounded comrade out of harm's way, that's a 200-pound deadlift, at least, right? Dead weight. If the person next to him can't pull their weight, literally, it puts everyone at risk. Now, I know some feminists might be scoffing at this or whatever. But here's another adding on to this, a cultural angle that you might not want to hear. Men are biologically wired to protect women for all of human history until like less than 100 years ago. Okay. Um, Men have instinctively shielded women in times of danger. This has been their job. Okay. Seeing women die in combat, I think, would demoralize men in ways that seeing male comrades might not. It's not sexist. It's biology. So, does putting women with lower physical standards, because this is a real thing. I'll get into the details of the breakdown of that in a second. But does putting women with lower physical standards into combat roles make us more lethal? Same question as earlier. If the answer is no, then they shouldn't be there. Full stop. That's not to say that women can't or shouldn't be able to serve. They can and they do. But again, there are plenty of roles outside of combat where their skills are more valuable, in my opinion. All right. So let's dig a little deeper into the different expectations for men and women in combat roles. And by the way, this isn't just for the military. This is for becoming a police officer and things like that as well. So this issue is broader even than just the military. And this is where things get really interesting and I think concerning. In many branches of the military, men and women are held to different physical fitness standards. The reasoning is that these standards are based on average physiological differences between men and women. Oh my gosh, do we just admit that men and women are different biologically and therefore they have different physical standards? Oh, it's almost like there's a reason why we have men's sports and women's sports. I digress. Anyway, when it comes to combat roles, where there are literally lives on the line, does it make sense to use averages rather than one universal standard? For example, in the Army's combat fitness test, the minimum requirements for women are generally lower than for men in events like the deadlift, the 2-mile run, and the standing power throw. Okay, so for deadlift, male soldiers in combat roles might need to lift at least 180 pounds, while the requirement for women could be as low as 120. That's a big difference. 50 pounds? 60 pounds? My bad. 60 pounds? That's a big difference. That's a big difference when you're trying to drag a wounded soldier off the battlefield. 2-mile run. Male soldiers are required to complete it in 15 minutes or less, while women may have several additional minutes to finish. And by the way, if any of you watching are in the military or know more about these differences in standards, please let me know. This is just what I found. And there's also a woman, her name is Evie Pomporis, who was a special agent. She goes on podcasts and things like this talking about her experience. And these are also some of the things that she has said, right? Women are held to a different standard. She felt weird about that when she was, trying to become a cop. And apparently she actually worked extremely, extremely hard to meet the requirements of a man in the police force. I think all women should be required to do that, to be honest, if they want to be in a position like that. 2-mile run, 15 minutes or less for men. Women might have some more minutes. But guess what? The enemy doesn't care how fast you're expected to run. They care how fast you can run. Okay. So, speed is a big deal also when you're in combat. Pull-ups and push-ups. Okay. These are also scaled differently for men and women. Even though obviously upper body strength is critical for tasks like scaling a wall or carrying heavy equipment or wielding certain weapons effectively. Okay. Obviously, women have considerably less upper body strength compared to a man. In the Marine Corps, The story is similar. They recently experimented on gender neutral standards only to find that far fewer women could pass the tests required for combat roles. Surprise! Imagine that. Oh my gosh. It's almost like if you held everyone to the same high standard, there'd be less women because women generally are not as strong or fast as a man, okay, on average. As a result, the Marines reverted to different expectations for men and women. All right, this is where DEI comes in, right? You're letting people in not based on merit, but because you want to be inclusive, because you want to be nice. You want to not, make people feel like they're being left out. I don't know about you guys, but I care more about our military being effective and strong and all of those things that it's supposed to be, as opposed to it being a nice person's club that we just want to include everyone and make everyone feel special. That's not what this is about, and at least it shouldn't be. We have far too much of this niceness, this DEI leaking into somewhere it shouldn't. I think it makes more sense to have men in combat roles and not women. As I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Evie Pomporis, if a woman can meet the exact same standards as a man, great. Okay. Hand her a rifle, send her to the front lines. Okay. But lowering the bar for women creates a very dangerous situation for both men and women. You have a situation where actually a woman might not be as prepared or physically capable as she ought to be in a situation, in which case you're also indirectly putting her fellow male soldiers in danger. Okay. I don't think the wives of um, men in the military would feel very nice about their husbands being in active combat and perhaps being wounded and left to die because their fellow soldier, who is a woman, can't can't save these women's husbands, right? Like she can't carry a man over her shoulder to safety, okay? This is a danger not only for women, okay? Because they are being put into combat not as physically strong as men, but also you're putting men in danger because that's their fellow soldiers, okay? You're supposed to have you're supposed to have each other's back, and if one is much weaker and slower than the other, that's a problem. So it's not just about fairness, it's not about sexism, it's about survival and practicality. You don't see the NFL lowering standards for women to get drafted. um, because the league knows that doing so would compromise the integrity and competitiveness of the sport. Women would probably get hurt a lot more. And yet, when it comes to the military, the stakes are so much higher, so much higher. Okay. And the military isn't about touchdowns, it's about people's lives. So, the big question remains, why do we hold our warriors to a lower standards than our athletes? If we're serious about winning wars, shouldn't we all be expecting more out of our military? Why are we letting people into the military based on feelings and based on inclusivity instead of capability and strength and speed and all the things that we need to make our military successful? Ugh. Okay. So we should expect more from our military. We should expect more from ourselves. I think, if a woman wants to serve in the military, she should expect more from herself. If she wants to be, you just really want to be in a combat role, you better expect more from yourself. You better expect yourself to hold up to the standards of a male soldier. So we should expect more. And you can get more. Speaking of more, you can get more when you open a gold IRA with Birch Gold Group. and get free silver coins shipped directly to your home. That's right, it's the most wonderful time of the year. The time of the year when Birch Gold gives away free silver American Eagle coins for every $5,000 purchased. And here's the best part, you don't have to pay a penny out of pocket. By December 20th, simply convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax sheltered IRA in precious metals, and Birch Gold will send you your free silver coins directly to your home. Now, you might be thinking, why do I need to diversify into gold? My guy's headed to DC. Things are all good. Here's the fact, though, an administration trying to put a dent in a $36 trillion national debt in just 4 years, more like three, possibly even two, is like a field mouse trying to stop a freight train. We can't even afford to pay the interest on that debt, let alone the principal. So better safe than sorry. Take action now to protect your savings. Text the word Daily Clout to 989898 for a free info kit on gold to claim your eligibility for free silver on your purchase from Birch Gold. But you must do this by December 20th. Again, text Daily Clout to the number 989898 for peace of mind that lasts longer than 4 years. So let's not forget, as I mentioned earlier, the military is not just for combat roles. There are countless vital roles that ensure our forces are effective, from logistics to intelligence to medical services. Here's a quick rundown of military branches and roles that are non-combat focused. Army, administration officers, logistics and intelligence analysts. The Navy, you have engineers, IT specialists, healthcare providers. Air Force, you have pilots, non-combat pilots. Cybersecurity experts and maintenance personnel. Marines, you have supply chain management, avionics technicians, and public affairs officers. Space Force, satellite operators and data analysts. Coast Guard, safety inspectors, and search and rescue coordinators. These roles are critical. You don't need to be in the trenches to serve your country with distinction. And I think that for women who want to serve, a lot of these are a much more practical and better option for everyone. So here's the takeaway. DEI initiatives and culture wars have no place in the military if they compromise our ability to win wars, which they do. Everyone deserves respect and opportunity, but the battlefield doesn't care about your identity. It doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about results. And we should care more about results than making the military the cool club. So, whether we're talking about transgender policies or women in combat, DEI, hiring, and practices in general, the question always has to be the same. Does it make us stronger? If the answer is no, we need to rethink the experiment. Okay. It's not helping us. That means it's harming us. Okay. If it's not helping us, it means those people who we're letting in who are not making us stronger, those are roles that could have been filled by people who would make us stronger. Fully capable individuals who can do the job, who can lift the weight, who can do the pull-ups, who can do the push-ups, who can carry soldiers over their shoulders to safety. So the military and the police force and every organization and place where we have people in high stakes positions, we really need to stop letting in people based on feelings, okay? If you can't do your job, you shouldn't be there. If you can't pull the same weight as a man in a combat role, you shouldn't be in a combat role, okay? If you can't enroll and enlist in the military as your biological sex so that you're not violating the rights of female soldiers, you should not be in combat roles. You should not be in the military where that's going to happen, where you're going to demand access to women's spaces. That's not okay. We shouldn't be hiring people based on their race or their ethnicity or their identity or their sexual orientation or their gender. We should we should just have like one standard for everyone that's high that people have to meet. And if they don't meet it, then you don't make it. That's that's how this is, okay? I know I'm repeating myself now, but I would love to know your thoughts in the comments below, whether you agree with me or not, whether it's on people experiencing gender dysphoria, enlisting in the military, or women in combat roles. Let me know what you think. Um, I do read the comments and I find them helpful. So, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Generation Rogue. If you've got thoughts, questions, or hot takes of your own, you can hit me up on social media. I'm at Kate Hildreth on Twitter, on X, or like I said, drop a comment. Also, subscribe to this channel if you like videos like this. Just kind of me ranting, commenting. I have an occasional interview. My next video is an interview with an author who just came out with a really interesting book. It's super important about liberty and the two-party system and how we need to be really hyper aware of things going on around us. And it's not time to rest. It's time to take action. So you can find that on this channel next week. So you should follow this channel so you don't miss it. So until then, stay awake, stay curious, and I will see you next time.